All right. Good morning, five-star real estate agents and others. Uh, my name's Eric Graham, one of the deal doctors. We're here with Don Phelan, who is another deal doctor as well. Don and I typically help with uh, contract review, disputes, training, kind of legal grievances from the public, and just about anything else with regards to 16 different associations and interpretations of certain purchase agreements. But today we're going to be reviewing NAR, and everyone wants to wonder what's changed, what hasn't changed, what do we really need to do, and understand that NAR was a settlement. It was basically an agreement between the National Association of Realtors and the DOJ and others that wanted to take control over how we were going to start practicing or continue to practice real estate in our real estate profession. And these new changes took effect back in August 17, 2024. Now it's almost been 2 years. Uh, Don, it just seems like yesterday when when we were sitting here reviewing all of the legal documents from these settlements, and I don't know where the time's gone. It's been very quick, fast paced.
Yeah, it
And
was actually 3 years, more than 3 years ago, that Eric and I started the process to understand what the NAR settlement was proposing and what was going on. So it's been a long stretch here. Um,
and it was funny because initially when these things came out, we heard that sellers could no longer pay buyers brokers. We heard buyers agents would have to work for free. We heard cooperative compensation was prohibited. Every buyer had to sign a long-term buyer agency agreement before seeing a home. That was a huge dispute. That the misconception was you had to have a buyer agency agreement before you could even show a home. And we went round and round on this topic with multiple attorneys throughout the U.S., not just the state of Michigan, but all over the U.S. We were having uh, reviews on this. And most of those statements were just inaccurate. They were oversimplified. They were not correct. And today we want to focus on some of the practical rules that agents need to understand. So number one, what actually changed? Don, what actually changed? Two major changes affected everyday practice.
you
One,
have you have to have a property showing agreement or a buyer's agency contract in place to show a house.
yep, and buyer brokers compensations can no longer be offered through the MLS.
Yeah.
Before, we used to offer all of our compensations right on the MLS, right to the other side, done, over with. And agents were always guaranteed that offer of compensation, right? You didn't have to think about how you were going to get paid, it was already there. Well, now that's not the case. Number two, let's talk a little bit about what a written agreement means. A written agreement versus a buyer agency agreement are two different things. A written agreement is really what we're calling a property showing agreement. The property showing agreement does not hire you as a real estate agent. It simply allows you to open the door according to the NAR settlements that we need to have something in writing before you can show a property. Now, a lot of people will use this property showing agreement because it's a lot easier, right? You're kind of in this dating phase with your client. You're trying to figure out whether you want to work with them or whether they want to work with you. And you basically show them this property showing agreement, and it already discloses what your commission is going to be, uh, and what you're going to be showing them for the short period of time, and you move on. Compared to the buyer agency agreement actually hires you to perform for a certain length of period. And people always ask, well, are written agreements, are they always required before you show a home? Don,
Probably.
probably.
Yeah. In most
I mean,
cases,
we
but let me, I'm going to jump in and just say, This situation comes up more often than you'd imagine. Um, Recently, an agent called and said, "Well, I wrote an offer on a property, but I didn't write my commission into the purchase agreement, and I didn't negotiate a broker-to-broker agreement prior to submitting that offer to the listing agent. What now?" And the what now is if you didn't negotiate, if you didn't protect your uh, commission beforehand or through the purchase agreement, you have no right to a commission. It's that simple. So I don't know about you, but I like to get paid for doing what I do. And if you don't put your commission in the purchase agreement or negotiate the broker to broker commission prior to submitting the offer, there's a good chance you're not going to get paid. It's that simple.
Yeah, and understand as buyer's agents, this buyer agency agreement is now very important because it's going to spell out what you're asking of your client. Your buyer is responsible for paying your commissions. And the buyer agency agreements that you're creating, asking your buyer to pay you, should be very clear, such as example, 3% buyer, you're going to pay me as a buyer agent commission, or 2.5%, or 3.5, whatever it is that you negotiate, because that's the key term, a negotiated commission with your client. And we can't just simply say, well, buyer, you can pay me whatever the seller offers, right? You can't do that. You can't do a sliding scale. Hey, I'm going to work anywhere between 1 and 5%.
Yeah.
No, it's got to be very precise. You have to determine upfront what that commission is going to be.
And you
And
can't and you can't get paid more than what your buyer agency contract says.
correct. So,
It's that
so there's
simple.
a danger. Let's say you go in and you say, well, I'm only going to charge my client 2% commission. And guess what? Your buyer asks for 3% for a commission. Well, I don't know why they would, because you can only get paid 2%. So,
Yeah.
and,
Or
and
another example is where the listing agent says, "Oh, by the way, we're offering a co-op fee of 3% in your conversations." And you've got a buyer's agency contract that says 2%. You don't have a right to get that additional 1% unless you go back to your client and say, "Oh, by the way, they're offering more money for me. So will you fill out an amendment to our buyer's agency contract that says that I'm going to get paid 3% now versus 2%?" How's that going to play with your client? It doesn't work. It doesn't work well at all. So, Eric, excuse me. Um, Maybe what we should do is ask some of the people who are here, what questions do you have about the NAR settlement agreement? Anyone? So we want to make sure we cover what you want to know about it and not just have us talk. Nobody. Okay.
okay.
Alrighty then.
So let me take it to another level here then. That when you're a buyer's agent, you really need to start thinking on who's going to be paying your fees. That should be the number one question as a buyer agent. Who's going to be paying my fees? Is it going to be my buyer? That's normally who it would be. Or is it going to be the seller through the purchase agreement that we negotiate? That's just typically what we're seeing the majority of time is that we are negotiating the seller to pay the buyer agency commission. I see that more and more. I rarely see a cooperative agreement between broker to broker. Don, what are your thoughts on that? What are you seeing? And I know for a long time we've always been teaching agents to just negotiate it right on the purchase agreement because it was out in the open. It wasn't hidden behind the scenes between broker and broker. And it was easier, I think, for sellers and buyers to truly understand who was paying what and how much.
Well, there's a difference of opinion in between brokers. Some brokers are still using a broker to broker compensation like they used to years ago and for decades, where the listing agent took a listing and offered a co-op fee. Um, while that's less frequent than it used to be, um, it's not completely gone. Some brokers still demand that that's the way you do it with a broker-to-broker compensation agreement. Again, more and more people, more and more brokers are moving to what we have advocated for, which is having it on the purchase agreement. But either way, if you're going to work with it, uh, we want to make sure that you're covered in getting your commission. Kim says, sorry,
Remember the one, Don, where he never shared with it and he thought he was giving the offer 50,000 over, but the buyer's agent actually was asking for 25 and the whole thing blew up?
oh
Do you
yeah,
remember?
I'm sorry, start at the beginning because I didn't catch the first part of that.
So, sorry guys, I'm a little under the weather. So there was a situation where the buyer and seller were talking because it was an off-market sale. Seller happens to be an agent. And so they had negotiated with the buyer what the terms were going to be, but they wanted representation. So they went off and found an agent to represent them. And they thought that agent was representing for just a fee. Well, the agent wrote the offer, put in a compensation agreement for a full commission because their form doesn't need the buyer to sign it. They sent the offer over. The buyer thought they were offering $50,000 over list price. And when the seller rejected it, they found out that the agent had taken 25,000 of it for themselves and the buyer was not aware. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what happened in that particular situation is
Alexa, pause.
that the seller, one of the sellers, had a connection with the buyer. And as a result, they went back to the buyer, circumvented the real estate agents, and they had a conversation and went, oh my gosh, they're charging us $25,000 to write up an offer. But the problem is for this agent who attempted to do that, that was a violation of the NAR settlement agreement right there because he was asking for more money than was on a buyer's agency contract. He had no business asking for one nickel without a buyer's agency contract or a compensation agreement in place with that buyer that permitted him to ask for a commission. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah,
it
so
does.
let's get into a situation here that I think a lot of agents stumble into. It's called a duplicate compensation. Now, people are saying, wait a minute, how do I get involved in being almost paying twice as a listing agent or as a buyer agent? And let's explain here a little bit. So, we want to make sure that agents aren't requesting payments or making payments for commissions twice. One time we can always you can make a payment through the purchase agreement. Another time your client can make a payment through the listing agreement. And let's go through a scenario here. So let's say there's already a broker to broker agreement paying the buyer broker 3%. So if we call up someone and they're saying, hey, we're willing to offer you 3%, you probably don't want to also ask the seller to pay another 3% in the purchase agreement. So let's say I'm a buyer agent. I send over a co-op brokerage and I get it signed by the listing brokerage that I'm collecting 3%. Great. I probably don't also want to go back on and say, okay, seller, I want you to pay 3% on the purchase agreement to me as a commission because I've already received 3% from a broker to broker, and I don't also want to duplicate that charge on the purchase agreement. It'd be a duplicate. Now, I guess if I was claiming I wanted 6%, I could get 3% as a co-broke and 3% from the purchase agreement.
Yeah.
But the listing agent is going to be in trouble now because the listing agent just agreed to pay 3% to the brokerage from their listing agreement, and another 3% the seller will be paying on a purchase agreement.
So it's one or the other. Either you're going to get paid broker to broker, or you're going to get paid on the through the purchase agreement from the seller. That's why we created the language the way we did for the purchase agreement that says the seller is going to pay buyer cost for buyer agency fee up to, for example, 3% of the sales price. This includes any offer that may have been made through a buyer brokerage agreement. In other words, it very clearly states we're not going to double dip here. We're not going to go in and ask for 3% on the purchase agreement and another 3% that's being offered through the co-brokerage agreement. That's why some brokers are still out there using the broker to broker agreement, because they perceive that the buyer's agent is asking for a double dip, if you will, 3% on the purchase agreement and 3% on the buyer broker agreement, or the broker to broker. If you're a listing agent, you need to be very, very aware that you're going to get offers that will say, 3% on the purchase agreement, and then they'll send you the broker to broker agreement and essentially commit your seller to 6%, paying buyer's agent 6%. Does that make sense?
Don,
Yeah.
Don, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Don and Eric, thank you. I've never been to one of these and I appreciate it. So I'll be coming to more, but I appreciate you explaining that, Don, because I come from a brokerage where they wanted both. And I always would question that because I found it to be more confusing because of exactly what you just said. It puts you in a position where they could end up paying 6% because I don't think it's clear at all. So it's my understanding here at Five Star that if we're on the purchase side, if we put it on the purchase agreement, that's all that's required. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric,
What happens if you have a co-op? Let's say you have a co-brokerage agreement, broker to broker agreement, and that's missing from your closing statement. You do have a signed broker to broker agreement, so you can be assured that you're going to be compensated because it's coming from the broker to broker. But you need to make sure you review your agreement, contact the broker or the listing broker to verify that they have that documentation, and then make sure that title company gets a copy of that to correct that missing instructions. Because what's happening is if you have a broker to broker payment, in that closing instructions, it will show commission from the listing brokerage. Then it should also have Five Stars information because the listing brokerage is paying that portion of it, but it would show up there. So it's important that you ensure that your title companies have all the documentations, and a broker to broker compensation is a form that the title company should have a copy of.
Eric, you wrote something about various models for paying commission. It's number 10 in our outline for today. I want to go through that because I think it's really important. If you're a listing agent, how do you list a property when you sit down with a seller? How do you list a property? Are you taking it as 3% commission that the seller is going to pay and 0% for a potential buyer? I don't know. There are a number of ways you can do that. But I think that one thing that we're seeing now is a lot of listing agents are moving to a total commission for, I'll use a 6%, for example, and they'll take the total commission at 6% and offer 0 to a buyer's agent. And they'll wait for a buyer's agent to put something in the purchase agreement or ask for something in a co-brokerage agreement prior to the offer being submitted. And the reason is this: if you've got a 6% and they've got a 2% buyer's agency contract, you're not offering them 3%. You're not playing your hand before they submit the offer. When they submit the offer and it says 2%, well, your seller may have actually saved 1%, or you may have uh, gotten another 1% if you choose to keep the whole commission. That's your right to do that. But you know, a lot of the philosophy here is a lot of agents think, I'm not going to give up a co-brokerage agreement or a co-brokerage commission without knowing what they're asking for. And I think that's a pretty smart strategy, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. Why give it up? Why give it away when you don't know? And if you have a lot of broker or a lot of agents out there only asking for 2.5%, then let's say you got your listing for 6%, you're only going to be crediting back your seller 2.5%, so you get to keep 3.5. So you just give yourself a little bit of a raise by not automatically assigning a percentage to it to a buyer agent.
Eric, if I'm a buyer's agent and I'm going to go out and show a bunch of houses, um, do I have the right to go and call all of the listing agents that I'm going to show houses for and ask them what they're paying in a co-brokerage agreement?
Yes, we have the right to be able to pick up the phone and ask a listing agent if they're offering a co-brokerage fee or compensation. They just can't put it anywhere on the MLS or Showing Time or any other platform that uses like an MLS data interface. Uh, they could even market it within the house if they wanted on a sign, offering buyer agent compensation. But we just don't see a lot of listing agents doing that in homes. Again, it's almost as if you're negotiating against your own client. If you're a listing agent and you decide, hey, listing agent or my seller, let's just pay 3%. I'm going to negotiate against you right now as my client. You're the seller. I want you to pay 3% to a buyer agent. Why the heck would I have my client agree
Yeah.
to pay 3% up front? Why am I negotiating against my own client? I should be saying, no, let's wait. Let's not offer anything. Let's wait to see what the offer is that comes in. Maybe the offer comes in and it's an agent who's buying their own property and they want zero commission. Great.
So, Eric, let's say that I call, I'm going to show 10 houses, and I call all 10, and I find that most of them are paying willing to pay somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. Okay. But I find one of them or two of them that's only going to pay 1% or is offering zero commission. Do I have the right to not show that property to my buyer?
So what Don is saying is a very serious claim. It's known as steering. It's illegal. You can't do it. You don't have a right to actually pick and cherry pick homes based on commissions. So if you're contemplating that, don't. What you need to do before you cherry pick is to disclose, disclose, disclose. You have to have a conversation that's a hard conversation with your client that, look, I'm charging 3% commission to represent you. There may be homes out there that don't pay the entire commission. One, let's say if a home is offering less than what my buyer agency is, buyer, do you have the funds to be able to pay me? Number two, we will do our best to negotiate the entire compensation that you are hiring me for. Keep in mind that if we can't get that negotiated on the purchase agreement, that we may have to find another home that allows me to be compensated to represent you. That's the hard discussion that someone needs to have. And we're not steering. It means that we're going to try and go and negotiate the best we can on that purchase agreement in order for me to get paid. I don't work for free. I'm not going to represent someone for free. And it's sometimes they're not going to get the home that they want because they can't afford it, because they can't pay for my services. Now, there's a possibility that they could just terminate my relationship and say, heck with you, Eric, I still want this home, and I'm gonna go right directly to the seller. Well, that would be a shame, but at least you made ground rules up front. You explained how you were going to operate, how you were going to negotiate, and that's disclosure.
I want to spend just a moment more on the steering concept, and it's true. You cannot steer a client in the direction of the one that the property that's paying the most money to you. That's a violation of our agency duties. And by the same token, it used to be common practice that when you sat down with a listing, somebody who's going to sell their house, agents would very often say, well, you have to offer a certain amount to a buyer's agent in order to make your house marketable. And to some extent, that was true, because I know that there were agents out there looking at the MLS offering and making a decision about which houses they were going to show their clients. And if it was offering 1.5% or 2 or 2.5%, back when the commissions tended to be 3 to 3.5% for a buyer's agent, they would go, well, we're not gonna look at that house because it's just not right for you. And as a result of that, that's why this lawsuit happened, exactly doing that. So we have to be very careful on both sides that we don't suggest to buyers or sellers that we as the broker are entitled to a commission and that we have to pay something, some incentive to a buyer's agent in order to show your house. It's just very dangerous territory.
Yeah, so just be mindful that with this NAR settlement, remember, compensation is negotiable. That's a big key now. Compensation is not set by NAR, and compensation cannot be offered through the MLS. Cooperation does not require compensation. That means cooperation. Broker and brokers can cooperate together. Doesn't mean they have to compensate one another through a broker to broker compensation. Uh, so if you call a listing agent and they don't offer a co-broke compensation, that's okay. You don't have to. They can just say, well, we're going to put it on purchase agreement.
Okay,
And
so
seller paid.
Eric, one quick question. So I'm a listing agent and I'm going to show one of my listings. Do I need a property showing agreement?
No, if you're working on behalf of your client, you do not need to have anyone who's coming through get a property showing agreement. That was a big uh, discussion that we had, which I think took almost 4 months for us to determine and figure out. Because at one time they were saying, yes, anyone who comes into the house, you need to have them sign a property showing agreement. And we thought this is crazy. No,
Okay,
we're working on behalf of our seller. We want people to come in. We don't want to prohibit them from coming in.
follow up. I've got a listing and you're going to have an open house for me at my listing. Do you need to have a property showing agreement there?
No,
Okay.
no.
Those are some of the frequently asked questions we get. So I just want to make sure that we covered those here this session.
Yeah. Uh, the biggest thing is when you're sitting down with your client as a buyer's agent, explain what their options are. Explain uh, how you're going to negotiate compensation, and then understand where that compensation is coming from, whether it's coming from the brokerage or whether the compensation is coming from the seller to the buyer. Because those seem to be we duplicates. Again, we don't see as many duplicates anymore where we get a broker to broker agreement and then also it being written on the purchase agreement. We're seeing, I think, less and less of that. I think that's finally starting to correct itself. Any last thoughts, Don?
I don't, but do we have any questions out there? This is kind of an important thing that we, 2 years later, we're kind of evaluating how the business has changed and how much farther we have to go in order to get, full buy-in from all agents about how they're handling commissions. Any questions out there? All right,
Is there
cool.
somewhere where we can find the exact wording to include in the purchase agreement for negotiating compensation?
Yes, it's in the dot loop clauses section. If you
Thank
go,
you.
if you go to templates and then over to clauses, drop all the way down to clauses, and it's right in there.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything, Doug, anything this morning?
Oh, that was exactly what I was going to say because again, a frequently asked questions, especially that I get through broker support, is very much that. And you know what we find with all these brokers that have their own broker to broker agreement, you guys just simplified it for us. I mean, you just put it in the other provision paragraph of the purchase agreement. You use the exact language that the two of you have come up with. It doesn't get any easier than that. And again, having those conversations with your buyer of how that's going to work is super important. So, no, this is good. This is good stuff.
All right. Hey, if we have no more questions, thank you for joining and have a great day. Go out and sell some real estate.